All right, how much would it cost to buy this house in Bothell, Washington? What would your monthly payment be? How much cash would you have to bring? And would you be able to qualify for the loan? When you're in the early stages of just poking around at houses online, it's helpful to get a little bit more reliable information than you're able to just see on an online calculator and start to remember the basics of buying a house even if you've done it before. So that's what this video is for. We're going to look at this house in Bothell, Washington, and we're going to look at two different scenarios on it. To talk about the numbers involved. We're going to talk about one scenario where you are bringing 35% down, which is all the cash that you would have to bring in, all in with your closing costs and your down payment. That would be about $326,000. And then we're going to look at one scenario where you're bringing about 50% down, which again, if you have all your closing costs combined with your down payment, is going to be about $460,000. So you can check out both of the scenarios. You can watch. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, so you can watch both of them. I think that'll be helpful. But if you want, you can just skip to the one that matches you better. I will put chapters in the scroll bar here below to match your scenario. So we'll talk through the numbers on that. My name is Landon Bothell. I am a mortgage loan officer with Cleveland Street Mortgage based in Bothell, Washington. And this is a real quote we're going to look at. So let's go ahead and look at these numbers. So a few assumptions I'm making as we're looking at these quotes, because your quotes, your interest rate, your pricing is not just a factor of the house and your down payment. It's a factor of a lot of different variables about your specific situation. So one of the assumptions I'm making is you're probably not a first-time home buyer if you're looking at this place. You may be, and that's great. You won't be too far away. It won't be a huge difference, but it does make a little bit of a difference. If you are a first-time home buyer, sometimes that improves your pricing. It just changes things a little bit. And then I'm assuming, you can see up here, I'm assuming you have a credit score of 740. If you have a little bit better than that, great. That might help you out a little bit. If you have significantly worse than that, then it's going to be a different situation. If you're a little bit below that, then it's just going to maybe increase your pricing a tiny bit. But anywhere in the 700s is probably going to be fairly similar to this pricing. And then I'm just assuming basically you're going to be, you have some cash to bring to the deal. You're not just scraping by a down payment for your first house. You have some cash to bring to the deal. As I mentioned before, both of these scenarios use several $100,000 as down payment. So we'll look at those numbers. So on the left here, let's start with this scenario, which is the 35% down scenario. And right away you can see your monthly payment would be $4,490. So none of this is exact. These are just meant to give you a good idea of where we're at right now. I'm making this video nearing the end of March. So $4,490 is going to be your monthly payment there. And the breakdown, the components of that is, I'm assuming $180 per month in homeowners insurance. Now, homeowners insurance, that could vary. That could be a little bit higher. That could be a little bit lower. This is probably a pretty reasonable estimate, pretty average number. However, it just depends on your insurance provider and what your coverage is. So that number is going to be a little bit different, obviously. Taxes are $488 a month. That number is actually drawn from the county website for 2024 taxes, and so that number is pretty dialed in. So $488 a month, and then principal and interest is the last component. And that's just a function of your loan amount of $581,750, and your interest rate. And so all that comes together as $4,490 per month. So loan amount, that's pretty intuitive. It's just the purchase price minus your down payment. Interest rate, that's a pretty good ballpark for where we're at right now. And then that interest rate is based on no points, technically $87 in points. And if you're not familiar, points are a fee that you can pay up front to get a lower interest rate. You tell the lender, hey, I want to lock in a lower interest rate, and I'll cover it by paying you a little bit up front. And there are various reasons you might do that. I'm not going to go over the strategy behind that right now, but this is basically assuming no points. The reason this one is $87 and this one's $492 is because the way that interest rates are priced by most lenders is very rarely do they get down to right at zero. We can do that, but it just takes a little bit of tweaking. Basically, they come at certain increments, and those increments are priced in certain amounts, so this is basically as close to zero as we can get. That number could be thousands and thousands of dollars. And then other closing costs down here, $11,790. Pretty good ballpark. That you might even expect that to be a little bit higher. This loan amount is probably pretty reasonable, but somewhere in that $10,000 to $12,000 probably in this area, unless assuming you don't have anything crazy going on with your loan, not a tons of points or other fees. So that's a pretty good estimate. That's based on a lot of different things. Closing costs. It includes both costs to get the loan, paying the parties that helped you get the loan, and then fees, costs that are involved in having the loan that you will be paying on an ongoing basis while you have the loan. But in order to get it set up properly, when you first start, you have to pay some of those costs ahead of time. And then estimated cash to close. So that means a total cash, all the cash you're going to have to bring to the deal to lock this in, of about $326,000 for this 35% down scenario. I'll come back and we'll talk about both of these at the same time as far as qualifying. How much income would you have to make to qualify for this? And we'll talk about that from a lender's perspective, not like a budgeting perspective, but we'll talk about that in 1 second. So let's look over at this 50% down scenario. So again, we're using a credit score of 740, assuming you're not a first-time home buyer and assuming you have a decent amount of cash to bring in. And so this knocks your monthly payment down to $3,608. Pretty significant difference there. 15% doesn't always make a huge difference. 15% different down payment amounts. But when the loan amount is getting or the purchase price is getting towards $1 million, then 15% can make a pretty significant difference, which these two are pretty different in terms of their monthly payment. So $3,608 monthly payment. Homeowners insurance and taxes are going to be the same, $180, $488. Again, homeowners insurance is a rough estimate there. It's a pretty good average number that you might be able to expect, but that's going to depend on your provider and your coverage amount. The taxes are dialed in. That number is drawn from the county website based on this house. And then principal and interest is the last portion. No homeowners insurance on either of these because you're above 20% down. Now this principal and interest amount is going to be based on the loan amount and the interest rate. The loan amount is $447, which is 50%, and the interest rate is 6.875. Now again, that's a pretty good ballpark for where we're at right now near the end of March, but again, this is not a guaranteed rate. This is not an advertisement. It's just a ballpark of where we're at right now, and that interest rate is based on basically 0 points. So points are a fee you can pay up front to get a lower interest rate. Credit is the opposite of that. Credit is when you tell the lender, hey, I will take a little bit higher interest rate if you'll cover some of my closing costs. So technically, you can see that number is negative $492. Technically, that is a credit of $492 to get this interest rate of 6.875. However, like I mentioned before, if you skip to this section, interest rates, lenders typically just have a sheet of what their interest rates are in certain preset increments, and they tell you how much it costs to get that rate. So they're pricing it based on the interest rate, not on 0 points. So technically, you could probably get to 0 points and pay get zero credit here if you wanted. With our lender, you can do that. However, this is functionally zero. That number could be thousands and thousands of dollars. And then other closing costs, it is basically the same here, $11,121, slightly lower loan amount, so it's going to be slightly lower closing costs. That ballpark of probably $10,000 to $12,000 is a good rough estimate to have in your head. It could vary for various reasons. It includes, again, if you skip to this section, it includes a combination of two elements. One is what's called prepaids, which are just they're not costs involved in getting the loan. They're costs that you will be paying on an ongoing basis as part of your loan. but you have to pay some of them ahead of time when you first get the loan, in order for the lender to have them while you're still getting set up in the system. So that's one portion, and then the other portion is just paying the parties involved that help you get the loan, and then paying whatever costs for new title and things like that that are actually involved in getting the loan, getting the house. And then the last section here is your total cash to close of $459,731. So that's at that 50% down. That's your down payment plus any closing costs. That's what you're going to have to bring cash all in order to get to that 50% down point and see this monthly payment here. Okay, so real quick, let's talk about qualifying. How much income would it take to qualify for these two loans? So the way that qualifying works, if you're not familiar, is lenders look at your DTI, your debt to income ratio. And that ratio needs to be less than 50%. And the way that ratio is determined is that they take your total monthly debts. I'm just going to do this. Your total monthly debts, and divide that by your gross monthly income. So they take your new housing payment that you're trying to take on, and then they add that to any other monthly debts you have, your credit card debt, your student loan debt, car debt, whatever. And they add all that together, and then they divide it by your gross monthly income. That's your income before taxes. And if that number is less than 50%, for the most part, you're good to go. They will approve you to take on the loan. However, one note on that is that calculation is specifically for conventional loans. And with FHA, it's a little bit different. It's a little bit higher. In a sense, if your total debts with other debts combined takes you over 50%, then they'll say, okay, we'll give you a little bit of wiggle room. There's not a ton of wiggle room, but there is some. But then they drop down the number a little bit to 48%, I think 47 maybe. If it's just your housing payment and divide that by your gross monthly income, that number, the threshold's a little bit lower for FHA. So it's just slightly different. It's still similar. VA is pretty different how they calculate your qualifying. But for conventional and pretty similarly for FHA, this is how it's done. And that gross monthly income number is income in the eyes of the lender. So if you are self-employed and you make $100,000 one year and $300,000 the next, and then $400,000 the next, and then $200,000 the next, then if it's wildly varying like that, then they have specific ways of figuring out what they're actually going to count as your income. Or if you've only been doing it a year for a variable position like that, or just variable hours, or you're entirely commission. If you don't have a ton of history, then it might be a little bit difficult. So this is whatever you're using to qualify. It's whatever they count as usable. And if you're getting along with your spouse, then and you both have usable income, then you could combine that. It's whatever you're using, and that number needs to be less than 50%. So if you keep that rule in mind, then looking at these two monthly payments, then for the 35% down scenario, you'd have to be making $8,980 per month, which comes out to about $108,000 per year. And that's for qualifying. It's not for budgeting. You can figure out what you're comfortable taking on. But just as far as qualifying, this is the qualifying income you would have to be making. And then for the 50% down, you can see it's a good bit less, $7,216 a month. Which comes out to $86,592 per year. If you wanted to get a look at a real quote on a house that you're looking at, or you just want to start peeking around and see how much income would be usable for you, see how much house you could qualify for, then please do reach out and chat with us. We'd love to talk with you. We do loans in Washington and Idaho. Again, my name is Landon. I work with Cleveland Street Mortgage, and you can check out any of our info in the description here. If you want to just see more about our process, more about what it's like to work with our team, then there's a video linked in the description. You can watch that video, and that will give you a sense of what it's like to work with us before you actually reach out if you want. Or if you're ready to reach out, go ahead and find our contact info in the description. We'd love to work with you.